This is it, the end of the season and series, with about as fitting of an ending as it could be. The episode is both emblematic of the series' weaknesses and strengths. Let's get recapping. Serizawa and Reigen make their way to the center of the tornado. However, Serizawa's energy is being sapped by Mob, believing they should head back for their own safety. Reigen is not deterred by this, carrying forward on his own, mentioning there was a private matter that he wanted to discuss with Mob. Meanwhile, Mob's shadow is quickly consuming him. He fears Tsubomi witnessing this form of him. His shadow states that's exactly what it wants, as it informs Mob how he first fell for Tsubomi. As children, she was completely accepting of him, never treating him differently regardless of his powers. Reigen arrives hoping to chat with Mob. The shadow dislikes Reigen, only seeing him as the exact opposite of Tsubomi, only ever using Mob for his powers, despite all the good he's done for him. Mob's shadow consumes him entirely, tossing Reigen around and walking away. Although Reigen is battered and beaten, he digs deep and resolves to catch up to Mob, using all his cherished memories of his protege as motivation. It reaches the entrance to the park, but somehow Reigen was able to endure and cut off Mob. Irritated, the shadow is ready to deliver the killing blow. Shockingly, Reigen is able to halt his attack. We learn this is due to the efforts of Dimple, who was revealed to be possessing Reigen. He didn't actually pass on that day he took out the divine tree. Dimple explains he was drawn to the energy from the tornado and is struggling to maintain his existence. Reigen demands Dimple retreat so that he can have a heart-to-heart with Mob. He confesses he lacks any Esper abilities, seemingly shocking Mob to the core, causing the tornado to disappear. Reigen continues, stating he lied to everyone in his life for a long time, including the day he met Mob, mentioning that there is always another side to everyone, but it's thanks to those parts of them they were able to meet. As well, Mob is the person he is because of his powers, and not in spite of them.
If nothing else, I think they're quite useful. The way you use them when you work as my apprentice, so many clients have been helped with those powers.
Finally, Reigen lets Mob know he doesn't need his guidance and can handle anything on his own. With the weight of these words, Mob and his shadow become one. Shigeo Kageyama is whole once again. Reigen and Dimple leave Mob to walk to the park on his own, returning shortly after to let them know he was rejected. Tsubomi explained that she had never seen Mob in that way. Reigen and Dimple are more shocked that she was waiting for him despite the havoc. Reigen cheers Mob up and lets him know they can get help from other Espers to repair the city. Over half a year later, the Telepathy Club are already planning their next trip to Mount Mudboat, with Misato tagging along this time. We learn that Mob is now the vice captain of the Body Improvement Club, with Sagawa as captain. It's also gotten quite popular, though Mob has still kept in touch with the graduating club members. Ritsu has also taken on more responsibilities, replacing Tokugawa as vice president. The brothers run into Teru and his new hairdo on their way to the Spirits and Such office. We find out that Tomei has taken a part-time job working for Reigen. As well, it appears that Serizawa's night school courses have paid off for the business, along with Dimple, who joins Reigen on his field assignments. Tomei teases Mob as Ritsu lets it slip that his brother and Tsubomi speak over the phone periodically. The Telepathy Club, the Lab Kids, and Sho's new haircut join our gang at the office, as they all prepare to surprise Reigen for his birthday. Reigen enjoys his best birthday ever, out of the two we've witnessed. Everyone enjoys a hearty laugh after Reigen lands face first in his cake. The last image of the series is Mob with a great smile on his face. I'm going to mix things up for the final episode. Usually I like to leave my most harsh criticism, if any, for the end, but I want to finish on a good note, so I'll start by ravaging the episode first. I swear I do have good things to mention, just give me a bit. Let's start with the big one. Mob's main concern after reconciling with his shadow is to ask out Tsubomi, and there's just a small, teeny little detail: the utter catastrophic state of the city. We've seen Mob get horribly upset at himself for multiple days after he destroyed Black Vinegar Middle School and embarrassed Teru. Yet this situation doesn't seem to faze him too much, despite it making the prior scene appear like a drop in the ocean. It also takes away a bit of urgency from other characters, in particular Teru, seeing as a strong part of his arc was saving the citizenry. In the end, the show, or at least Mob, comes close to being apathetic to the people who suffered at his hands. Even if the next day everything returned to normal, it cannot be said that this was not a traumatizing experience for those affected. It seemed like they could have leaned on prior material. He restored the middle school before. They could have at least had a line implying he fixed the city once he and his shadow reconciled. It's not as if it would be unbelievable that he would be that powerful. As for the government's involvement, there may have been some implications of monitoring Mob. However, there aren't any consequences in this episode, despite this being on par with what Claw accomplished as an organization. I did appreciate the attempt to make the incident appear as a tornado to the world. It's undercut by the people witnessing quite clearly what is happening, along with law enforcement. Mob's life should have never returned to normal after this incident. The world building is in shambles in this episode. Unfortunately, as mentioned a couple of reviews ago, it's sort of expected at this point. Dimple is back, which shouldn't be too surprising considering the last episode made a statement against sacrifices, so it would be a bit hypocritical to allow for it to slide for one character but not others. And you know, there was some signaling to the audience that Dimple was dead, but there was no definitive evidence like a burning corpse, so there's the gotcha there. Like I've said, even if it turned out he survived, I don't think it should take away from his character and his sacrifice. However, his inclusion here is well and truly an asshole of the most unnecessary variety. I was glad the show thought it would be ridiculous for Reigen to make it on his own, though Serizawa gets shafted, unable to make a meaningful contribution to this episode. We just get told Serizawa isn't strong enough to make it through the tornado, who's likely a stronger Esper than most of the cast, outside of Mob, Mogami, and Suzuki. But somehow, a fading away Dimple can pull this off. From a character perspective, this could have been used to tie back to Serizawa's original confrontation with Mob, where Serizawa needed a real friend that could help put a cap on his powers from going wild. Sound familiar? Moving on, while there is a tornado approaching with debris and cars flying around nearby, Tsubomi stands there like the exceptional person she is. She considers leaving, however she recalls how shaky Mob's voice was, deciding to stay. Sounds as good a reason as any to throw your life away. Other than all that, I didn't enjoy the damage Reigen took before getting possessed by Dimple. I consider that the moment he looks up at the tornado, as it mirrors the scene of Dimple describing being drawn into it.
And then I was drawn into this power spiral, which is how I was able to come back.
The neat detail they added is Reigen covering the back of his head, but I don't think that's going to do much when we see him taking blows like these. So on to better things. Mob's efforts to get his shadow to trust him were wholesome.
You've decided you'll deign to accept me? Is that what you're saying? No. I'm asking you to accept me, the same way everyone else has.
I thought the best bit was to have his shadow put in his shoes. Both needed to accept each other, which is at the core of the struggle of this arc. Starting from believing they could live without each other, as we've seen with Mob's attempts throughout the series and the shadows throughout this arc, to ending with learning they can be one. The subtle changes in Mob's expressions and mannerisms in the epilogue were probably the greatest rewards the audience could receive.
With everyone's help, I made it this far. So please, look out for each other.
Witnessing this introverted boy slowly break out of his shell, make friends along the way, take on harsh challenges, and find the courage needed for his pursuits. I only wish we could have gotten more, a whole episode of this Mob, which I think is the best kind of praise. Reigen is the heart of this episode. He knew exactly what was needed to reach Mob, pointing out the uncomfortable truths about himself, believing he needs to lie to be successful in any aspect of his life. However, the end of the episode is a rejection of that claim. That doesn't mean the show has a black and white morality. It's mentioned that Reigen doesn't like lying, but it's not as if he hasn't improved people's lives in the process. The show acknowledges as much during his press conference in Season 2.
Have you ever had any conflicts with your clients?
None. Any results on those cases? They've all been solved.
Feelings of shame, guilt, or inadequacy, these shadows that all people carry, aren't meant to be hidden.
What you're going through, doesn't make you different, because every one of us has another side. So you don't have to worry about it.
Rather, they should be acknowledged and explored. Great lesson for kids growing into their teens, developing and tackling more complex emotions for the first time.
But, well, go ahead and worry. Everyone does. It's only natural.
Speaking of the separate ways arc, Mob acknowledged he was aware that Reagan had no powers, though it is meaningful for Reagan to say it out loud, an admission of all his faults throughout the series. It's a little puzzling how or why Reagan thought confronting Mob like this would work, perhaps hoping he could shock Mob out of this state, which just happens to be the correct assumption. In all fairness, he had to try something, right? Also, having the first theme play while he runs to Mob was a nice touch. One last item to cover, Mob and Tsubomi. There was never much material to be invested in their relationship, more so, I would believe the viewer's investment was based on wanting to see Mob succeed. We've seen our protagonist struggle with almost every aspect of his life. A lot of the actions he takes, whether consciously or subconsciously, were because of Tsubomi. So it's quite clear how devastating it was for Mob to be rejected. Well, I have to say, it is fitting that it worked out the way it did. We barely know Tsubomi, with minor clues of her personality given to us from other characters, but never Mob.
I remember playing with her when we were all little kids, but honestly, I found her kind of hard to deal with. I remember her going home in the middle of a game of hide and seek.
To find out they still ended up talking afterward pretty much confirmed that relationship will develop. She remains blunt throughout all her interactions, regardless of age. Tsubomi said she never saw Mob as a romantic option. I don't think that was a poor attempt to let him down easy. I think she meant that literally, and his confession opened her mind, likely letting this relationship blossom. Ultimately on this point, and it's going to be a bit meta, but why even tease to the audience with this moment if it's not meaningful? For example, a character isn't going to be shown to be coughing if it isn't to signify that they're not sick.
I have no appetite.
He caught a cold.
To sum up this episode, the world building is a mess. It doesn't seem to matter how many world-ending events happen, things will always reset the next day. The character work is at its strongest here. Mob and Reagan's arcs come to a close. From the start of the series, they're both in denial of these shadows, ending with them being more honest with themselves, integrating their shadows, allowing them to lead more fulfilling lives. Despite all its faults, Mob Psycho 100 does something so simple, yet so absolutely important.
Muscles.
What is he talking about?
It follows through with what it sets up.
As he grew older and became more aware, he came to realize just how dangerous his powers were. While attempting to spare the world around him, Mob's aversion to using his powers has become a complex.
I can't say I saw this arc coming, especially after the midpoint of the season slowing down the pace so hard. But not thinking about this episode as part of the season, and more so taking this finale as part of the series, makes the whole journey feel complete. The series maintained its focus on Mob's growth and the growth of our main cast, with almost every main character having to deal with a side of themselves that exposed their shame or guilt, though in all cases made them better people having gone through the experience. Even I felt better having experienced it. That's all.